An ordinary walk. A forgotten secret. You're about to witness what no one ever expected. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. The January air bit at Eleanor Harrington's cheeks as she trudged through 6 inches of fresh snow, her breath forming small clouds in front of her face. At 68, her morning walks with Scout were non-negotiable, regardless of Silver Hollow's harsh Midwest winters. The golden retriever trotted happily ahead, his paws creating perfect imprints in the pristine white blanket covering the town. "Easy there, boy," Eleanor said, tugging gently on the leash as they rounded the corner near Willow Creek Park. Her arthritic fingers stiffened in her worn leather gloves, the same pair her late husband Thomas had given her 15 years ago, before cancer took him. Silver Hollow was still asleep, the quaint storefronts of Main Street dark against the pale lavender dawn. Only Greta's bakery showed signs of life, golden lights spilling from its windows as the morning's first batch of sourdough filled the air with a tantalizing aroma. Eleanor was about to turn toward home when Scout suddenly stiffened. His ears perked up and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, following his gaze. Through the thin morning mist, she spotted a black Cadillac Escalade idling near the park's maintenance area. A tall figure in an expensive camel hair coat emerged, carrying what appeared to be a heavy black garbage bag. Even from a distance, Eleanor recognized Richard Blackwood, Silver Hollow's wealthiest resident and most powerful real estate developer. "That's odd," she murmured, instinctively stepping behind a large oak tree. Scout's growl deepened. Blackwood glanced around nervously before tossing the bag into a dumpster and hurrying back to his vehicle. The Escalade's tires spun briefly on the icy road before gaining traction and disappearing down Maple Avenue. "Hush now," Eleanor whispered, stroking Scout's golden head as he began barking insistently. "What's gotten into you?" But Scout wouldn't be silenced. Instead, he pulled forcefully toward the dumpster, nearly yanking the leash from Eleanor's grip. "Scout, heel," she commanded, but the dog was uncharacteristically determined. When they reached the dumpster, Scout pawed frantically at its side. Eleanor hesitated. She'd spent over 40 years as Silver Hollow's head librarian before retiring, and curiosity had always been her defining trait. Her blessing and her curse, Thomas used to say. "This isn't our business," she told Scout firmly. But even as she spoke, she found herself peering inside. The black bag had split open slightly on impact, revealing the corner of what looked like a photograph album and several crumpled documents. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat when she glimpsed a familiar face in one of the exposed photographs. "It can't be," she whispered, her voice trembling. With trembling hands, she reached in and pulled out the photograph. The smiling young woman with auburn hair and Eleanor's same deep-set hazel eyes was unmistakable. "Catherine," Eleanor breathed, a name she hadn't spoken aloud in nearly 30 years. The name of her younger sister who had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a hastily scribbled note about running away with a boyfriend no one had ever met. Eleanor's hands trembled as she gathered the torn documents and photographs from the black bag. Her mind raced with questions that had haunted her for decades. Why would Richard Blackwood, Silver Hollow's most powerful man, have photographs of Catherine? What were these documents? And why dispose of them so secretively? "Come on, Scout," she whispered, stuffing everything back into the bag. "We need to get home." The walk back to her modest Victorian house on Elm Street felt longer than usual. Each step sent shooting pain through her arthritic hip, but Eleanor barely noticed. Her thoughts were consumed by the sister she had lost, or perhaps abandoned, 30 years ago. Once inside, Eleanor spread the contents across her dining table. There were land deeds, contractual agreements, and dozens of photographs featuring Catherine looking progressively more distressed. The most recent one appeared to show her sister standing beside a younger Richard Blackwood, her expression tight and fearful. "This doesn't make sense," Eleanor muttered. "They told us she ran away with that boy from Chicago." Scout whined softly, resting his head on her lap as she sifted through yellowed newspaper clippings about Silver Hollow's development boom in the early 90s. The telephone's shrill ring startled her. "Hello," Eleanor answered, hastily covering the documents with a table runner. "Ellie, it's Mabel. You missed our coffee date at Greta's. Everything all right?" Eleanor hesitated. Mabel Phillips had been her confidant for over 40 years, Silver Hollow's former city clerk with an encyclopedic knowledge of town affairs. Actually, no, Eleanor replied, her voice unsteady. Could you come over? There's something you need to see. 30 minutes later, Mabel's weathered Lincoln Continental pulled into the driveway. Eleanor watched from the window as her friend, bundled in a purple wool coat, carefully navigated the icy path to the door. Good Lord, Ellie, you look like you've seen a ghost, Mabel declared, unwinding a long paisley scarf from her neck. Maybe I have. Eleanor led her to the dining room. Mabel's face drained of color as she examined the photographs. Where did you get these? Richard Blackwood dumped them this morning. Scout found them. Eleanor pointed to a property deed. Look at this, Mabel. This says the land where Blackwood Estates sits belonged to my family, to my grandfather. But that's impossible. My father sold that land decades ago. Mabel's plump fingers trembled as she adjusted her reading glasses. Not according to this document. According to this, your family still owned it when development began. And look, she pointed to a signature. Catherine was working as a secretary at Blackwood Enterprises. She never told me. Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking. Why wouldn't she tell me? The question is, Mabel said gravely, what happened to make her disappear? And why is Blackwood throwing away these documents now? Eleanor stared at her sister's face in the photograph. Catherine's eyes held the same quiet determination Eleanor recognized in herself, the stubborn resilience their father had instilled in both of them. I need to know the truth, Mabel. I accepted that ridiculous story about her running away because it was easier than searching. I failed her then. Eleanor's voice hardened with resolve. I won't fail her again. Ellie, be careful, Mabel warned. Richard Blackwood isn't just wealthy. He practically owns this town. The mayor, the police chief, half the town council, they're all in his pocket. I don't care, Eleanor replied, stroking Scout's golden head. I've spent 30 years wondering what happened to my sister. If these documents connect her disappearance to the Blackwoods, I'm going to find out how. A gust of wind rattled the windows, sending a chill through the old house and down Eleanor's spine. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering Eleanor's and Scout's tracks from earlier that morning, erasing the evidence of their fateful detour to the dumpster. But it was too late for second thoughts. Eleanor had already made her decision. I'm going to find out what happened to Catherine, she said firmly, no matter what it costs me. The following morning, Eleanor woke before sunrise. She'd barely slept, her mind cycling through fragments of memories. Catherine's laugh, their childhood adventures exploring Silver Hollow's forests, and the devastating morning when she found her sister's hastily scribbled goodbye note. Eleanor dressed in her warmest clothes and prepared a thermos of coffee. She needed to visit the town hall archives before Blackwood realized what was missing from that garbage bag. You'll have to stay home today, Scout, she told the golden retriever, who whined in protest. I need to be discreet, and you, my friend, draw too much attention. The town hall stood at the center of Silver Hollow, its red brick facade and white columns a testament to the town's prosperous past. Eleanor's heart pounded as she climbed the salt-stained steps, her boots leaving wet imprints on the marble floor inside. Eleanor Harrington. A cheerful voice echoed in the quiet lobby. Haven't seen you here in ages. Nancy Weber, who had replaced Mabel as town clerk 5 years ago, beamed at her from behind the reception desk. Good morning, Nancy, Eleanor replied, forcing a smile. I'm doing some research on Silver Hollow's history for the library's archives. Thought I might look through some old land records. Well, aren't you dedicated? Retired 3 years and still working for the library. Nancy chuckled. Records room is still downstairs. You remember the way. The basement archives smelled of dust and old paper. A comforting scent to Eleanor after 4 decades as a librarian. She methodically searched through property records from the late 1980s and early 1990s, the period when Blackwood Estates was developed. After 2 hours, she found what she was looking for, the original deed transfer for the land. According to these official records, her father had indeed sold it to Blackwood Enterprises in 1987. But the document in her dining room at home, the one from the black garbage bag, contradicted this completely, showing her family still owned the land in 1992 when construction began. One of these is a forgery, she whispered to herself. Eleanor was so engrossed that she didn't notice the figure watching her from the doorway until a deep voice broke the silence. Mrs. Harrington, What a surprise. She looked up to find Richard Blackwood himself standing there, his tall frame filling the doorway. At 72, he was still imposing, silver-haired and immaculately dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than her monthly pension. "Mr. Blackwood," she acknowledged, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Just doing some historical research." His steel-gray eyes flickered to the documents spread before her, then back to her face. "Fascinating hobby. Anything particular catch your interest?" "I'm researching Silver Hollow's development through the decades," she replied vaguely. "Oh." He stepped closer, glancing at the records. "The 1990s were transformative for our little town. Without Blackwood Estates, Silver Hollow might have become another dying rural community." "Yes, quite the success story," Eleanor agreed, subtly closing the folder. "Though I've often wondered about the workers who built it. So many new faces came to town, then disappeared when construction finished." Something flickered in Blackwood's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or concern. "Construction crews are nomadic by nature," he replied smoothly. "They follow the work." "My sister worked for your company briefly," Eleanor said, watching his reaction carefully. "Catherine Harrington. You might remember her." His expression remained impassive, but Eleanor noticed his right hand tense slightly. "Harrington, there have been so many employees over the years." He smiled, revealing perfect veneers. "I'm afraid I don't recall everyone." "She disappeared about 30 years ago," Eleanor pressed. "Shortly after starting at Blackwood Enterprises." The silence between them grew heavy. "How unfortunate," he finally said. "Family tragedies are the hardest to bear. I lost my wife around that time as well." "I remember," Eleanor said. "Car accident, wasn't it?" "Yes." Blackwood checked his watch. "Well, I won't disturb your research further. Good day, Mrs. Harrington." As his footsteps receded up the stairs, Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. There was no doubt in her mind now. Richard Blackwood remembered Catherine perfectly well, and he was worried about what Eleanor might discover. She quickly photographed the official documents with her phone before gathering her things. As she climbed the stairs, she felt certain of one thing. She had just announced herself as a threat to one of the most powerful men in Silver Hollow. Weak February sunlight filtered through Eleanor's kitchen window as she poured coffee for Mabel. 3 weeks had passed since her encounter with Richard Blackwood in the archives, and Eleanor had been meticulously building a timeline from the documents she found. "He knows I'm looking into Catherine's disappearance," Eleanor said, sliding a folder across the table. "I've been watching his house. There's been unusual activity, people coming and going at odd hours." Mabel sighed heavily, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. "Ellie, maybe you should let this go. We're not spring chickens anymore. What if he's dangerous? What if he hurt my sister?" Eleanor countered, her voice sharpening. "Look at this." She pointed to a news clipping featuring a younger Catherine standing behind Blackwood at a groundbreaking ceremony. This was taken 2 weeks before she disappeared. "She doesn't look like someone planning to run away with a boyfriend." The doorbell interrupted them. Scout barked once, then trotted to the front door, tail wagging. "Are you expecting someone?" Mabel asked. "No." Eleanor moved cautiously to the door and peered through the peephole. A man in his mid-40s stood on her porch, his expensive overcoat dusted with snow. There was something familiar about his sharp jawline and steel-gray eyes. "Can I help you?" Eleanor asked through the door. "Mrs. Harrington? I'm Michael Blackwood, Richard's son. I'd like to speak with you about my father." Eleanor exchanged a worried glance with Mabel before reluctantly opening the door. Scout sniffed Michael's hand suspiciously. "May I come in? It's not a conversation for doorsteps." Eleanor led him to the living room. Michael Blackwood sat rigidly on the edge of her floral sofa, declining offers of coffee or tea. "I understand you've been researching old land records," he began without preamble. "Word travels fast in Silver Hollow," Eleanor replied coolly. "My father mentioned you were looking into Blackwood Estates." Michael leaned forward. He seemed concerned. "And he sent you to warn me off?" Michael's expression hardened. "My father doesn't know I'm here. We're not exactly close." Eleanor studied him carefully. "Then why are you here, Mr. Blackwood?" "Because I've spent 20 years wondering why my mother's car suddenly veered off Ridgeline Road 30 years ago." His voice remained steady, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. No mechanical failure was ever found. No explanation for why an experienced driver would lose control on a clear day. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I don't understand, Eleanor finally said. What does your mother's accident have to do with land records? Maybe nothing. Michael's eyes met hers. But her accident happened 3 days after your sister disappeared. My father changed after that. He became different, harder, more secretive. He paused. I was away at college. When I came home, everything had changed. Mabel spoke up from the doorway. So you think there's a connection? I think, Michael said carefully, that my father built his empire on secrets. And I think Mrs. Harrington might have stumbled onto one of them. Eleanor sat straighter, her decision made. I found evidence suggesting Blackwood Estates was built on land that legally still belonged to my family, and photographs of my sister working for your father, looking increasingly afraid. Michael's expression didn't change, but his knuckles whitened as his hands clenched. Show me. Eleanor retrieved the documents from her dining room and spread them on the coffee table. Michael examined them silently, his legal training evident in his methodical approach. This counter-signature, he finally said, pointing to a faded line on one document. That's Judge Warren's. He was a family friend who suddenly broke ties with us around the same time. Is he still alive? Eleanor asked. No. Heart attack in '97. Michael looked up, his eyes intense. Mrs. Harrington, I've spent 2 decades building a law practice in Chicago, keeping my distance from my father's business. But if he's built everything on fraud, or worse, I need to know. Why now? Mabel asked suspiciously. After all these years? Michael's expression softened slightly. My daughter just turned 17, the age I was when all this happened. It makes you reevaluate things. Eleanor studied the man before her, Richard Blackwood's son, yet so clearly at odds with his father. Scout had settled at Michael's feet, a good sign in Eleanor's experience. So what are you proposing, Mr. Blackwood? She asked. An alliance, he replied simply. I have resources, legal expertise, and knowledge of my father's business practices. You have evidence and motivation. Together, we might uncover the truth about your sister and, perhaps, my mother. The grandfather clock chimed 4 times as Eleanor considered his offer. Outside, snow began to fall again, thick white flakes swirling in the wind. All right, she finally said. But understand this. I'm not stopping until I find out what happened to Catherine, no matter where it leads. Neither am I, Michael replied, extending his hand. March arrived in Silver Hollow with melting snow and muddy streets. Eleanor's kitchen had become their unofficial headquarters, its walls now covered with maps, timelines, and photographs connected by red string. Scout lay beneath the table, occasionally nudging Michael's hand for attention. Judge Warren's widow agreed to meet us tomorrow, Michael said, marking another name on their growing list of contacts. She keeps hinting she has something important to share, but won't discuss it over the phone. Eleanor nodded, massaging her aching wrist. I spoke with 3 former Blackwood Enterprises employees yesterday. None remembered Catherine specifically, but one mentioned a secretary who made trouble around that time. That fits with what we've pieced together, Michael replied, tapping a document. Catherine appears to have discovered the land fraud first. These notations are hers, comparing the falsified deed with the real one. The doorbell rang, causing Scout to bark sharply. That'll be Jacob, Eleanor said, rising slowly. Her arthritis had been flaring lately, worsened by stress and long hours hunched over documents. Jacob Martinez, Silver Hollow's only investigative journalist, entered with his usual whirlwind energy. At 32, he'd built a reputation for fearless reporting in the local gazette, much to the mayor's irritation. You were right, he announced without preamble, shaking snow from his leather jacket. I checked the county records against what you found. The signatures don't match. Someone forged your father's name on that later deed, Mrs. Harrington. Call me Eleanor, please. She poured him coffee as he spread photocopies across the already cluttered table. This forgery is sophisticated but not perfect. Jacob pointed to subtle differences in the signatures. Whoever did this had access to your father's actual signature for reference, but rushed the job. Could it stand up in court? Michael asked. Jacob shrugged. Maybe not today, but 30 years ago in a small town where Blackwood was already establishing influence? Absolutely. So my father never sold that land, Eleanor said quietly. They stole it through forgery. And Catherine found out, Michael added. She was working directly with deed transfers in my father's office. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Here's what I don't understand, Jacob said finally. Why risk everything for one parcel of land? Richard Blackwood was already wealthy from his Chicago developments. Why commit fraud for this property specifically? Eleanor's brow furrowed. My grandfather always said our land was special. It's located over the watershed that feeds the town's aquifer. Water rights, Michael said suddenly. Of course. My father doesn't just own the houses at Blackwood Estates. He owns the water supply beneath them. Silver Hollow's municipal system taps into it, and he charges the town for usage. Eleanor's hand trembled as she set down her coffee cup. He's been profiting from our family's water for decades. There's more, Jacob said, his voice dropping. I've been digging into environmental reports. There are concerning chemicals showing up in tests from wells near Blackwood Estates. Nothing over legal limits yet, but trending upward. What kind of chemicals? Michael demanded. Industrial solvents. The kind used in manufacturing. Jacob hesitated. The kind that could cause certain types of cancer if exposure is prolonged. Eleanor felt suddenly cold. Silver Hollow has twice the state average for rare cancers. The doctors always blamed it on agricultural runoff. My mother died of a rare cancer 5 years after her accident, Michael said, his voice tight. The doctors were baffled by how aggressive it was. The kitchen fell silent except for Scout's soft whining. The dog sensed the tension, moving to press his warm body against Eleanor's legs. We need to tread carefully, Jacob warned. If what we suspect is true, that Blackwood not only stole your land, but possibly contaminated the water supply, we're dealing with something beyond fraud. And people who covered this up might go to extreme lengths to keep it buried. Like making my sister disappear? Eleanor's voice wavered. Or staging a car accident for my mother, Michael added grimly. Jacob gathered his papers. I should go. I have a contact at the EPA who might help us get independent water testing done. After Jacob left, Eleanor stood at her kitchen window, watching the last snow melting from her backyard. Scout pressed against her side, his steady presence comforting. What happens if we're right? She asked quietly. If your father is responsible for Catherine's disappearance? Michael's reflection appeared beside hers in the window glass. His expression hardened with resolve. Then we make sure justice is served, no matter who gets hurt. Even if it's your father? Especially if it's my father, Michael replied, his gray eyes, so like Richard's, turning cold. Some sins can't be forgiven, Mrs. Harrington. Some debts must be paid in full. March arrived in Silver Hollow with melting snow and muddy streets. Eleanor's kitchen had become their unofficial headquarters, its walls now covered with maps, timelines, and photographs connected by red string. Scout lay beneath the table, occasionally nudging Michael's hand for attention. Judge Warren's widow agreed to meet us tomorrow, Michael said, marking another name on their growing list of contacts. She keeps hinting she has something important to share, but won't discuss it over the phone. Eleanor nodded, massaging her aching wrist. I spoke with 3 former Blackwood Enterprises employees yesterday. None remembered Catherine specifically, but one mentioned a secretary who made trouble around that time. That fits with what we've pieced together, Michael replied, tapping a document. Catherine appears to have discovered the land fraud first. These notations are hers, comparing the falsified deed with the real one. The doorbell rang, causing Scout to bark sharply. That'll be Jacob, Eleanor said, rising slowly. Her arthritis had been flaring lately, worsened by stress and long hours hunched over documents. Jacob Martinez, Silver Hollow's only investigative journalist, entered with his usual whirlwind energy. At 32, he built a reputation for fearless reporting in the local gazette, much to the mayor's irritation. You were right, he announced without preamble, shaking snow from his leather jacket. I checked the county records against what you found. The signatures don't match. Someone forged your father's name on that later deed, Mrs. Harrington. Call me Eleanor, please. She poured him coffee as he spread photocopies across the already cluttered table. This forgery is sophisticated but not perfect. Jacob pointed to subtle differences in the signatures. Whoever did this had access to your father's actual signature for reference, but rushed the job. Could it stand up in court? Michael asked. Jacob shrugged. Maybe not today, but 30 years ago in a small town where Blackwood was already establishing influence? Absolutely. So my father never sold that land, Eleanor said quietly. They stole it through forgery. And Catherine found out, Michael added. She was working directly with deed transfers in my father's office. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Here's what I don't understand, Jacob said finally. Why risk everything for one parcel of land? Richard Blackwood was already wealthy from his Chicago developments. Why commit fraud for this property specifically? Eleanor's brow furrowed. My grandfather always said our land was special. It's located over the watershed that feeds the town's aquifer. Water rights, Michael said suddenly. Of course. My father doesn't just own the houses at Blackwood Estates. He owns the water supply beneath them. Silver Hollow's municipal system taps into it, and he charges the town for usage. Eleanor's hand trembled as she set down her coffee cup. He's been profiting from our family's water for decades. There's more, Jacob said, his voice dropping. I've been digging into environmental reports. There are concerning chemicals showing up in tests from wells near Blackwood Estates. Nothing over legal limits yet, but trending upward. What kind of chemicals? Michael demanded. Industrial solvents. The kind used in manufacturing. Jacob hesitated. The kind that could cause certain types of cancer if exposure is prolonged. Eleanor felt suddenly cold. Silver Hollow has twice the state average for rare cancers. The doctors always blamed it on agricultural runoff. My mother died of a rare cancer 5 years after her accident, Michael said, his voice tight. The doctors were baffled by how aggressive it was. The kitchen fell silent except for Scout's soft whining. The dog sensed the tension, moving to press his warm body against Eleanor's legs. We need to tread carefully, Jacob warned. If what we suspect is true, that Blackwood not only stole your land, but possibly contaminated the water supply, we're dealing with something beyond fraud. And people who covered this up might go to extreme lengths to keep it buried. Like making my sister disappear? Eleanor's voice wavered. Or staging a car accident for my mother, Michael added grimly. Jacob gathered his papers. I should go. I have a contact at the EPA who might help us get independent water testing done. After Jacob left, Eleanor stood at her kitchen window, watching the last snow melting from her backyard. Scout pressed against her side, his steady presence comforting. What happens if we're right? She asked quietly. If your father is responsible for Catherine's disappearance? Michael's reflection appeared beside hers in the window glass. His expression hardened with resolve. Then we make sure justice is served, no matter who gets hurt. Even if it's your father? Especially if it's my father, Michael replied, his gray eyes, so like Richard's, turning cold. Some sins can't be forgiven, Mrs. Harrington. Some debts must be paid in full. The Silver Hollow Spring Festival transformed the town square into a fairground of pastel decorations and white tents. Eleanor watched from a bench as families strolled between craft vendors and food stalls, a picture of small-town contentment that now seemed like a cruel facade. Are you sure you want to do this today? Mabel asked, adjusting her floral scarf against the April breeze. The whole town will be watching. That's precisely why today is perfect, Eleanor replied, her fingers nervously stroking Scout's golden head. Richard can't make a scene in front of everyone. They had spent the past month gathering evidence. Judge Warren's widow had provided her husband's personal journal, detailing how former Mayor Frank Collins had pressured him to approve falsified paperwork. Jacob's EPA contact confirmed alarming chemical levels in the groundwater beneath Blackwood Estates, levels that couldn't be explained by agricultural runoff. Eleanor spotted Richard Blackwood near the main stage, shaking hands with Mayor Phillips, his silver-gray hair gleaming in the sunshine. At 72, he still cut an imposing figure in his tailored navy suit. It's time, Eleanor said, rising slowly. Scout pressed close to her side as they crossed the square. Michael waited near the bandstand, his expression tense. You don't have to do this, he said quietly as she approached. We have enough evidence for the authorities now. I've waited 30 years, Eleanor replied firmly. I need to see his face when he realizes he's been caught. Mayor Phillips was midway through his opening speech when Eleanor and Michael approached the stage. Richard's eyes narrowed as he spotted them, his practiced smile faltering slightly. And now, the mayor announced, I'm delighted to introduce this year's festival sponsor, our own Richard Blackwood. Polite applause rippled through the crowd as Richard stepped to the microphone. Thank you, Mayor. Silver Hollow has always been. Excuse me, Mr. Blackwood. Eleanor interrupted, her voice carrying clearly across the square. Before you continue, I'd like to ask about some documents I found recently. Documents concerning my sister, Catherine Harrington. A hush fell over the crowd. Richard's face remained composed, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. Mrs. Harrington, this is hardly the time or place. It's exactly the time, Eleanor countered, stepping closer to the stage. 30 years ago, my sister disappeared after discovering that you had falsified documents to steal my family's land containing the aquifer that supplies water to this entire town. Murmurs rippled through the gathering crowd. The mayor stepped forward, his face flushed. Mrs. Harrington, this is outrageous. Sheriff, please, it's not outrageous, it's true. Michael intervened, climbing onto the stage despite the sheriff's movement toward them. We have proof of the forgery, the water rights theft, and evidence suggesting deliberate contamination of the groundwater. Richard's composure slipped, his eyes darting between Eleanor and his son. Michael, what are you doing? The right thing, Father. Finally, Michael turned to address the crowd. Many of you know me as Richard Blackwood's son. What you don't know is that Blackwood Estates was built on stolen land, and the water you've been drinking contains industrial chemicals that have caused cancer rates in Silver Hollow to skyrocket over the past 3 decades. Gasps and outraged voices rose from the crowd. Sheriff Wilson stepped forward, his hand hovering near his weapon. These are serious accusations, he said gruffly. Do you have actual evidence? We do, Jacob called, emerging from the crowd with a thick folder. Environmental reports, falsified deeds, witness statements. Enough to warrant a full investigation. Richard's face had gone ashen. His eyes locked with Eleanor's. What happened to my sister, Richard? She demanded, her voice quieter now, but somehow more powerful for it. What happened to Catherine after she discovered what you'd done? I had nothing to do with Catherine's disappearance, Richard hissed, his composure cracking. That was Frank's doing. I just benefited from the situation. And my mother's accident? Michael asked, his voice raw with emotion. Was that Frank's doing too? A flash of genuine shock crossed Richard's face. Your mother? No, that was. He stopped abruptly, awareness of the crowd seeming to return to him. This is absurd, he declared loudly, straightening his suit jacket. These are baseless accusations from a confused old woman and my estranged son. I'll be speaking to my attorneys about this slander. Scout suddenly growled, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. Following the dog's gaze, Eleanor spotted former Mayor Collins attempting to slip away through the crowd. Frank Collins, she called out. Don't you think it's time you told the truth too? The elderly man froze, his weathered face contorting with panic as all eyes turned to him. I never meant for anyone to get hurt, he blurted, his voice cracking. It was just supposed to be a land deal. Just business. Richard Blackwood's face hardened into a mask of fury. Shut up, Frank, he spat, but it was too late. The dam had broken. 30 years of secrets were flooding out into the bright spring sunshine of Silver Hollow's town square, and nothing would ever be the same again. The aftermath of the spring festival confrontation spread through Silver Hollow like wildfire. By evening, the local news vans from neighboring counties had arrived, their satellite dishes gleaming in the twilight as reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. Inside, the sheriff had commandeered the largest conference room, where Eleanor, Michael, and Jacob presented their evidence to state investigators. Mrs. Harrington, I understand your frustration, Special Agent Diane Garcia said, her dark eyes compassionate but professional. But we need to focus on verifiable facts. You've established the land fraud and environmental concerns, but regarding your sister's disappearance, we need more than speculation. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the glass of water. I understand, Agent Garcia. But Catherine wouldn't have just left. She was planning to expose the fraud. These annotations prove it. She tapped the yellowed paper with Catherine's handwriting in the margins. The conference room door opened, and Sheriff Wilson ushered in a petite woman with silver-streaked black hair. Maria Suarez, Richard Blackwood's former housekeeper, had agreed to make a formal statement after learning of the public confrontation. Mrs. Suarez, Agent Garcia said, you worked for the Blackwood family during the period in question? 17 years, Maria confirmed, her accent still pronounced despite decades in America. I was there the night Miss Catherine came to the house. Eleanor's heart stuttered. You saw my sister at the Blackwood estate? Maria nodded, her dark eyes solemn. It was late, maybe 11. Mr. Blackwood was meeting with Mayor Collins and Judge Warren in his study. Miss Catherine arrived unexpectedly, very upset, with papers in her hand. She was shouting about forged documents and threatened to go to the authorities. "What happened?" Michael asked, leaning forward. The mayor panicked. Maria continued. "He started yelling about his career being ruined. They argued for a long time. I couldn't hear everything, but when Mr. Blackwood opened the door later, he looked different, cold. He told me to forget what I'd heard." "And Catherine?" Eleanor whispered. Maria hesitated. "She left with Mayor Collins. Mr. Blackwood stayed behind. The next day, he told everyone she had quit suddenly." "Did you see her again after that night?" Agent Garcia asked. "No, but—" Maria reached into her purse and withdrew a small leather-bound book. "A week later, I was cleaning and found this hidden in the guest room where they had taken her before she left with the mayor. I should have given it to the police then, but I was afraid. I had children to support and no papers." Eleanor's hands shook as she accepted the diary. Catherine's name was written inside the cover in her sister's elegant script. "I kept it all these years," Maria said softly. "I always wondered what happened to her." As Eleanor flipped through the pages, her vision blurred with tears. The final entry, dated the night Catherine disappeared, was addressed to her. "Ellie, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. I've discovered what they did to our land, to Father's property. They're threatening me now, saying no one will believe me. Mayor Collins is taking me somewhere tonight. Says it's for my own good, that I'll be compensated if I stay quiet. I don't trust him. If I disappear, look for land records from 1992 and water test reports. The truth is there. I love you." The room fell silent as Eleanor passed the diary to Agent Garcia. "This changes everything," the agent said, scanning the final entry. "Mrs. Suarez, would you be willing to testify about what you witnessed?" Maria straightened her shoulders. "Yes, it's time." Outside the courthouse, the evening air had turned chilly. Eleanor sat on a bench with Scout at her feet, absorbing the reality that her sister had been forced to leave, threatened, not willing. Michael approached, his face drawn with emotion. "They've taken my father into custody for questioning. Frank Collins suffered what appears to be a heart attack after his initial statement. He's in the hospital under guard. I need to find her, Michael," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "Catherine might still be alive somewhere." "We will," he promised, sitting beside her. Maria gave us another lead. An address in Arizona where she once forwarded a package on my father's instructions. "It might be nothing, but it's something," Eleanor said firmly, her grief temporarily overshadowed by a fragile hope. "After 30 years of nothing, it's something." As they sat in silence watching the stars appear over Silver Hollow, Eleanor felt Scout suddenly stiffen beside her. The golden retriever's ears perked up, his attention fixed on a figure moving slowly toward them through the evening shadows. "Hello, Ellie," the woman said softly. Though her auburn hair was now streaked with silver and her face lined with age, her hazel eyes, so like Eleanor's own, were unmistakable. "Catherine," Eleanor whispered, her heart stopping. "I came as soon as I saw the news," Catherine Harrington said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "After all these years, I never thought I'd see Silver Hollow again." The courthouse steps blurred through Eleanor's tears as she stared at the sister she'd thought lost forever. Catherine stood before her, thinner and more weathered than in Eleanor's memories, but unmistakably alive. For a moment, neither sister moved, separated by 30 years of absence and unanswered questions. "Is it really you?" Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. Catherine nodded, her own eyes swimming with tears. "It's me, Ellie." Scout broke the spell, patting forward to sniff Catherine's hand curiously. When she knelt to stroke his golden head, Eleanor finally moved, throwing her arms around her sister with such force they nearly toppled over. "I thought you were dead," Eleanor sobbed, clutching Catherine as if she might disappear again. "All these years, I thought, I know," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Ellie. They gave me no choice." Michael stood silently nearby, giving the sisters their moment. When they finally separated, Catherine looked at him with wary recognition. "You're Richard's son," she said quietly. "You have his eyes." "Yes," Michael acknowledged. "But not his character, I hope." "We should go somewhere private," Eleanor suggested, wiping her tears. "There's so much to explain, So many questions. They retreated to Eleanor's Victorian house, where Mabel had prepared a simple dinner that sat largely untouched as Catherine began her story. They gathered in the living room, the warm lamplight softening the lines that years had etched on both sisters' faces. After they caught me with the documents, Mayor Collins took me to a motel outside town, Catherine explained, her fingers twisted nervously in her lap. He made it clear that if I didn't disappear, they would ensure that no one believed me. Or worse, they threatened you, Eleanor said, her voice tight with anger. Catherine nodded. Collins said accidents happen all the time in small towns. 2 days later, I heard about Sarah Blackwood's car crash. She glanced at Michael. I'm so sorry. I always wondered if that was meant as a warning to me. Michael's face hardened. My father has much to answer for. They gave me $10,000 and a bus ticket to Arizona, Catherine continued. Said if I ever tried to contact anyone from Silver Hollow or mention the land deal, they would take care of it. I was terrified, Ellie. I wanted to reach out so many times, but you were protecting yourself, Eleanor finished, squeezing her sister's hand. And possibly protecting me too. What happened after you left? Mabel asked gently. Catherine gazed out the window at the Silver Hollow night. I changed my name to Claire Harrison. Found work as a bookkeeper in Tucson. Built a quiet life. She paused, seeming to wrestle with herself before continuing. And I had a daughter. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. A daughter? Eleanor whispered. Catherine nodded, pain etching deeper lines around her eyes. Olivia. She's 29 now. A lawyer in Phoenix. Who? Eleanor began, then stopped, realization dawning. Richard. Yes, Catherine admitted, her voice barely audible. It was brief. Foolish. Before I discovered the fraud. Michael stared at her, shock evident on his face. I have a half-sister. She doesn't know who her father is, Catherine said quickly. I told her he died before she was born. Eleanor struggled to process this revelation. Does she know about us? About Silver Hollow. She knows I came from a small Midwestern town that I had to leave. Recently, she's been asking more questions. When the news broke about Richard's arrest and the allegations, she connected the dots. She's the one who persuaded me to come back. Catherine's expression softened with pride. She's brilliant, Ellie. Determined, like you. She wants to help build the legal case. I'd like to meet her, Eleanor said softly. She's flying in tomorrow, Catherine replied. She wouldn't let me come alone. The conversation continued late into the night as 30 years of separate lives were cautiously bridged. Catherine learned of their parents' passing, of Eleanor's marriage to Thomas and his death from cancer. Eleanor discovered that her sister had never remarried, devoting herself to raising Olivia and building a safe, if solitary, life far from Silver Hollow. As midnight approached, Scout suddenly raised his head from where he'd been dozing at Eleanor's feet. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he stood, staring intently at the darkened window. What is it, boy? Eleanor asked, reaching for his collar. The sound of breaking glass shattered the night's peace. Scout barked sharply as Michael leapt to his feet. Get down, he shouted, pulling Catherine away from the window just as a brick crashed through, narrowly missing her head. Attached to the brick was a note, the message clear in its brevity. Leave it alone. Storm clouds gathered over Silver Hollow as a late April downpour pounded the town. Eleanor sat in the hospital waiting room, her rain-soaked clothes clinging uncomfortably as she waited for news. Scout lay at her feet, still subdued from the previous night's intrusion. Any word? Michael asked, returning with 2 paper cups of weak coffee. His suit was rumpled from a night spent at the police station filing reports about the brick thrown through Eleanor's window. Nothing yet, Eleanor replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Catherine's with her now. After the threatening message, they'd moved to Mabel's house for the night. In the morning, Catherine had received a devastating call. Olivia's flight had landed safely, but on the drive from the airport, her rental car had been forced off the road by a black SUV. She'd been rushed to Silver Hollow Memorial with serious injuries. This wasn't an accident, Eleanor said, her voice low. They're escalating, trying to frighten us into dropping everything. Michael nodded grimly. Sheriff Wilson finally obtained a search warrant for my father's estate. They're executing it now. Catherine emerged from the ICU, her face pale but composed. She stabilized. The doctor says with luck, she'll regain consciousness soon. She sank into a chair beside Eleanor. I never should have involved her. I should have stayed away. This isn't your fault, Eleanor said firmly, taking her sister's hand. It's the people who've been poisoning this town for 30 years. The hospital's automatic doors whooshed open, and Jacob Martinez hurried in, rain dripping from his jacket. His face was flushed with excitement despite the grim circumstances. You need to see this, he said, producing a tablet from his messenger bag. The EPA team rushed tests on water samples from the aquifer beneath Blackwood Estates. The results are worse than we thought. Concentrated industrial waste, likely from chemical dumping in the early 90s. Dad knew, Michael said quietly. He must have. There's more, Jacob continued. The storm has caused extensive flooding at Blackwood Estates. 3 houses have already reported basement flooding, and the water coming in is discolored and has a chemical smell. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Catherine. The development was built on wetlands. Our grandfather always said it would flood eventually. A young doctor in blue scrubs approached, looking exhausted. Miss Harrison, your daughter is awake. She's asking for you, and for her aunt. Eleanor's heart leapt. She knows about me? Catherine nodded. I told her everything on the phone yesterday. She wants to meet you. Olivia Harrison lay amid a tangle of 4 lines and monitoring equipment, her dark hair stark against the white pillow. Despite the bruises marring her face, Eleanor could see Catherine in her strong jawline and Richard in her steel-gray eyes. So your Aunt Eleanor, Olivia said, her voice hoarse but determined. The librarian who cracked the case. And you're the niece I never knew I had, Eleanor replied, emotion tightening her throat as she took Olivia's hand. I'm sorry about this timing, Olivia said, gesturing weakly to her injuries. Not exactly how I planned our first meeting. What happened? Catherine asked, gently brushing hair from her daughter's forehead. The SUV came out of nowhere, Olivia recalled. Black Escalade, tinted windows. It forced me off the road, then stopped. A man got out, older, expensively dressed. He said to tell you that some secrets should stay buried. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Can you describe him? Tall, silver hair. Expensive watch. He seemed important. Olivia's eyes focused on Michael as he entered the room. Like him, but older. My father, Michael confirmed grimly. He must have made bail. I'm pressing charges, Olivia stated, her lawyer's instincts evident despite her injuries. And I'm joining your legal team. This just got personal. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Ms. Harrington, there's an urgent call for you at the nurse's station. Eleanor followed her out. Mabel's panicked voice greeted her. Ellie, you need to come quick. The flooding's reached your street. Scout and I are trying to save what we can, but the water's rising fast. Eleanor rushed back to explain the situation. Go, Catherine urged. I'll stay with Olivia. Michael, can you drive her? The drive through Silver Hollow was harrowing. Streets had become shallow rivers, and emergency vehicles crowded intersections. As they approached Eleanor's neighborhood, Michael was forced to stop. We can't drive any farther, he said. The water's too deep. Ahead, Eleanor could see her Victorian home partially submerged, water lapping at the first-floor windows. Neighbors formed bucket brigades to salvage belongings, while others evacuated in small boats. The documents. Eleanor gasped. All our evidence. It's in my dining room. Without hesitation, she waded into the rising water, ignoring Michael's protests. The cold shock took her breath away as the water climbed past her knees, then her waist. Determined, she pushed forward against the current, focusing on reaching her home before 30 years of secrets were washed away forever. The floodwaters receded from Silver Hollow as May brought warmer weather and tentative new beginnings. Eleanor sat on her front porch, surveying the damage to her yard. Watermarks stained the white clapboard siding 2 feet up from the foundation, but the house had survived, as had their evidence, rescued by Eleanor, Michael, and a team of determined neighbors who formed a human chain through the rising waters. Scout lay at her feet, his golden coat gleaming in the morning sunshine. The retriever had become something of a local celebrity after leading rescuers to an elderly couple trapped in their home during the worst of the flooding. How are the repairs coming along? Catherine asked, emerging from the house with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. 3 weeks had passed since her return, and she had slipped back into Eleanor's life as if the intervening decades had been mere moments. Slowly, Eleanor replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. But that's true for the whole town. The flood had caused catastrophic damage to Blackwood Estates. More significantly, it had forced toxic sediment up from the depths of the aquifer, confirming what their investigation had discovered. The EPA had declared a state of emergency, and testing stations now dotted the town. "Mom called," Catherine said, settling into the rocking chair beside Eleanor's. "Olivia's being released today. Michael's bringing her here." Eleanor nodded, a surge of happiness warming her more than the coffee. After 4 weeks of hospitalization, her newly discovered niece was finally well enough to leave medical care. The sound of tires on gravel announced visitors. Jacob Martinez's battered Jeep pulled into the driveway, followed by a sleek government SUV. "More interviews?" Eleanor sighed. "No, good news for once," Jacob replied, bounding up the steps with his characteristic energy. "The federal prosecutor wants to meet with you. I think they're ready to file charges." Federal prosecutor Anita Washington proved to be a formidable woman in her 50s with keen eyes that missed nothing as she laid out documents on Eleanor's newly restored dining room table. "Based on the evidence you've provided and our subsequent investigation, we're filing federal charges against Richard Blackwood, former Mayor Frank Collins, and 6 others for environmental crimes, fraud, and conspiracy," she explained crisply. "What you've uncovered here goes beyond Silver Hollow. It's part of a pattern of environmental negligence and corruption we've been tracking across 3 states." "And my sister's disappearance?" Eleanor asked. "Coercion and extortion," Washington confirmed. "Unfortunately, the statute of limitations has expired on some of these crimes, but we have more than enough to ensure significant consequences." A car door slammed outside, and moments later, Michael appeared at the screen door with Olivia leaning on his arm. Though still pale and moving gingerly, Olivia Harrington, she had recently filed to reclaim her mother's surname, radiated the same quiet determination Eleanor recognized in herself and Catherine. "Did I miss the good part?" Olivia asked, easing herself into a chair. "Just getting to it," Washington replied with a rare smile. "Mr. Blackwood has agreed to a plea deal." Michael's expression remained carefully neutral. "What terms?" "Full cooperation, testimony against his co-conspirators, substantial restitution to affected families, and the return of all property fraudulently obtained." Washington looked directly at Eleanor. "Including your family's land." Eleanor's breath caught. "After all this time?" "There's more," Washington continued. "The EPA has designated the aquifer a Superfund site. Cleanup will take years, but Blackwood's assets will fund it." "And my father?" Michael asked quietly. 10 years, minimum," Washington replied. "Given his age and cooperation, he'll likely serve his time in a minimum security facility." The room fell silent as they absorbed the news. Justice, so long deferred, had finally arrived, not in a dramatic courtroom confrontation, but in this quiet exchange around Eleanor's dining room table. Later that afternoon, as golden sunlight bathed the porch, Eleanor sat with Catherine and Olivia, the 3 generations of Harrington women finally united. Scout dozed at their feet, occasionally twitching in doggy dreams. "What will you do with the land?" Olivia asked, her lawyer's mind already planning ahead. Eleanor gazed out at Silver Hollow spread below them. From this distance, the town looked peaceful, its secrets buried beneath picturesque streets and weathered buildings. "I think," she said slowly, "that a nature preserve would be fitting. A place for healing, for the land, and for the people. With an animal therapy center," Catherine suggested, in honor of Scout's role in uncovering the truth. Scout's ears perked up at his name, his tail thumping against the porch boards. "And a memorial," Eleanor added, "to those who suffered because of the contamination, to those like Thomas, who never knew why they got sick." Michael joined them, carrying a tray with glasses of lemonade. Over the past weeks, he had found an unexpected place in their reconstructed family, part ally, part nephew by choice. "The town council approved the proposal for a people's tribunal next month," he reported. "A public reckoning where everyone can share their stories. It won't change the past, but it might help us all move forward." Eleanor nodded, reaching down to stroke Scout's silky ears. 1 year ago, on a freezing winter morning, she had been a lonely widow mourning a husband and a sister, both lost in different ways. Now, as spring enfolded Silver Hollow in new growth, she found herself at the center of a family rebuilt from fragments, in a town beginning to heal from 30 years of poison. both literal and metaphorical. "You know," she said softly, "my father always used to say that the truth is like water. It always finds its way to the surface eventually." Catherine smiled, taking her sister's hand. He was right about that, and about the land being special. As dusk settled over Silver Hollow, Scout suddenly raised his head, ears alert. He stood, tail wagging, and trotted to the edge of the porch, barking once toward the old maple tree where generations of Harringtons had carved their initials. "What is it, boy?" Eleanor asked, following his gaze. But Scout merely wagged his tail, his intelligent eyes seeming to hold secrets of his own, perhaps sensing that while one mystery had been solved, Silver Hollow would always have stories waiting to be uncovered, truths seeking the light. "I think," Eleanor said with a smile, "he's just reminding us that there's always more to discover." Around her, the family she'd found and the town she'd helped save settled into the peace of a spring evening. Changed, wounded, but ultimately renewed by the simple, unstoppable power of truth. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and if you watched until the end, comment "I watched until the end" and share your opinion about this story. Don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the end screen. It's very emotional.